Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on day one of our 3-day symposium. We are all really glad that you are here and that you are committed, by showing up and being committed to learning more about how to support Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans folks in the community. Whether you are service providers or community members, we're very thankful that you're here. We have a lot of guests and panelists here today who are going to share a lot of really important information, and I will introduce them really shortly. But first, I want to take time to extend the thank you a little bit more. I realize that this year has been a very long year for all of us with the pandemic and so many other difficult situations going on. So it hasn't left our mind for a bit that everyone, who's been working on the symposium, but everyone who's showed up today has been going through a lot. So I think I really appreciate that everyone is still here making time to learn from us and see what everyone has to say. So thank you for that. And we hope that you are safe and well as possible and that you've had all the supports that you need this year to get through everything. Through your participation here, you are supporting healthcare and social services to improve for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans folks. And we have so many important conversations and dialogues planned for today. So we are gonna go ahead and get started. The project has been a collaboration with so many people for so many years. We're in our 3rd year now, and I'm very excited that we're finally here at the day where we can share everything with you and to the public. I just want to take some time before I continue on to thank our funders, Public Health Canada, the City of Toronto, the Department of Justice, and the Law Foundation of Ontario. Your support and their support means a lot to us, and we wouldn't be, we wouldn't have been able to make it here without their support. I also really want to take time to thank our peer leadership group, our advisory committee, our graphic designer Manar, who has worked on so many of the visuals that you will see today and the visuals that you will see later on the webpage. And Wendy as well, our executive director, who isn't able to be here today, but she really wants to extend her gratitude to funders and to all of you for showing up. And I want to take a quick amount of time just to introduce myself. My name is Maisha. I'm the project coordinator here with TransFormed. I joined earlier this year as a project coordinator in February, but prior to that, I was on the peer leadership group on this project from the first phase in the first year that we started. I'm really excited to be here as someone who is non-binary, so here with lived experience and able to give back through all the work that we've done here. Someone who is Muslim, who works a lot in community organizing for both queer and trans communities, and really cares about this work and is trying to bring as much support and visibility as I can for myself and for everyone involved. So yeah, I'm very glad to be here. So I just want to say before I start the land acknowledgement and introduce Elder Blue, to make sure that you are able to really view the webinar as best as possible, I really recommend that you make sure that you are updated on Zoom to the latest version. We are spotlighting a couple of folks through the session today, so if you have the updated version, you'll be able to clearly see what we want you to view on the screen. So if you want to take time to quickly do that, you should be able to, and then join right back in. But yeah. So I will go ahead. I'm going to go ahead with reading Metrac's land acknowledgement, and then I will introduce Elder Blue to speak a few words about themselves, but to also speak to a lot of really important dialogues and for things that we need to keep in mind as we start this day and continue on. Metrac's board of directors and staff are committed to upholding the spirit and intent of the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Mission's recommendations and call to action. To this end, at the beginning of Metrac's meetings, we make a and respect territories of Ontario. We recognize the traditional Indigenous territories on which our organization is located and on which our programs and trainings take place. We recognize the failure of settlers to uphold Indigenous sovereignty of this land, and so we commit on an ongoing basis to decolonize our organization and bring light to this history. For thousands of years, this land has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by Upper Canada treaties. Today, the meeting place of Toronto, as in the Haudenosaunee word Toronto, is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are very grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. I wish to express gratitude to Mother Earth and for the resources we are using, and honor all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit who have been living on this land. We are aware that our settler acknowledgement uses language which may differ from language used by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, but we understand that language is also fluid and living, and we respect that diversity. We are also aware that not all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit refer to themselves in the same way. So some may refer to themselves in spiritual or religious contexts, while some may use regional names. I now want to take some time to introduce Elder Blue and have them come on to speak a little about themselves and to get us officially started with day one.
Thank you, everyone. Tansei, Ani, Kwekwe, Sego. I want to welcome everyone to Turtle Island. Welcome to the many nations that have always inhabited Turtle Island and have taken care of this land so that all of us can live, work, play, and exist in this space. I'll start off by saying Tansei ski nikamun, Natisi na kasun a Yahweh, Mayinkan dem, Atathakup Saskatchewan, Eskazoni na Dunjaba. What I've said to you is my name before I came into this human form was Earth Song and is Earth Song. And I said to you the word a Yahweh, which is a Cree word that translates into neither man nor woman. And that's something that I'm really working on with a lot of people, to look to their nations who are Indigenous and reclaim the original languages for those that are gender diverse, those that fall under the LGBTQ2SIA plus gender diversities and identities. So I wanted to bring that to your attention because I think it's very important that our voices are heard and our languages are acknowledged, and our terminologies for the gender diversity, which are very complex and which have responsibilities and roles that we each play from the many nations we come from. Welcome, everyone. This is a very important project, a time when we can celebrate gender diversity, non-binary identities, and all the acronyms that are used, because we find that you know, our identities are very personal, and there is many ways of expressing that with many different languages. So not to be leaving anyone out, so I will say all the gender diverse people that are out there. I want to remind everybody that as we come and we sit together, an Indigenous way of meeting is to come with an open heart, so that we can greet each other in a good way without any preconceived intentions of what's going to happen. So we ask today that our minds will be open to hear new concepts and new understandings. I ask that our ears will be open to hear things in a way that we've never heard before, that our eyes will be open to see things in a way that we haven't been taught before, and that our mouth will be open to speak kindness and love and gentleness and compassion to each other, so that we can do this work in a good way. And lastly, but not leastly, but that our heart will be open, that our heart will be open to accept people for who they are, how they are, what they do, where they come from, what they believe in, and to be supports to each other. Because I believe that's the greatest asset that we can have, is to be that support to someone else who may be having either a hard time or finding things a little bit challenging, to walk beside each other, not walking in front of someone so that we cannot see what's happening to them as they're behind us, because they may fall and they may need our help to get up and to continue walking forward, and to not walk behind them because we're not really supporting them and helping make sure that the path that they're going is in a good direction, because we can't see through them. but to walk side by side so we can do this work. So I ask those ancestors that are gone on before us and those ones that are yet to come, the ones that are watching our journey, watching what we do, looking to see how we will make that path an easier journey for them, and the tools and the instruments that we will have in place to support them when they come into this human form and walk on this earth as we do. So be gentle, be kind with each other, speak in a good way, be compassionate. If we treat each other like that, this will be the most beautiful meeting that you will be in. You will hear information that will gladly warm your heart. You may hear information that troubles you, in which case it will invoke in you that desire to make change, to change things for the better of each person, so that we all can exist in this space called Turtle Island and be prosperous and be healthy and be wealthy and be wise. So thank you for inviting me, and I will sit back and watch and see what has transpired and continue to grow and learn with each and every one of you. Hi, miigwech, walalan.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing that with all of us. I wish I had so many words to tell you that, like, the energy and the presence like that you create by being here. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you're here. Thank you. So with that said, I'd like to now introduce a partner that we've been working with since the beginning of the project, the bilingual aspect of our project. I'd like to bring up Maulud from Center de Francophone to introduce himself, but also to go over some of the interpretation functions of today and the current status of that, and if there are any changes, to let you know for like whoever would like any like French interpretations through the day today, what that kind of looks like.
Hi everyone, my name is Maulud and I work for Centre Francophone. I helped the beautiful project to see the light in the second country's language, which is French. And I am very, very happy to be here and to be with everyone to speak about the project that means so much to me. Equality has always been something very, very important to me. I run countries to come here just to feel safe. And because of this, I want to serve a good cause and I want to be here for everyone who is fighting for their equality and for voices to be heard. Having said that, I've worked with Maisha and with Laura, with Carolina, and many project persons who are involved in the project, just to translate from English to French and to hear the French community and hear their needs and see what do we need to attend these needs. I'll be happy here to I'll be here today and along those 2 other days after this to assist with anything I can do to get all the informations to everyone from English to French, and whoever needs any question, I'll be here. Any answer, I'll be here to support with that.
Thank you, Maulud. Yeah, and I just want to say I appreciate your support and your involvement in this so much, and it's been a pleasure working and knowing you. And all the resources and the work that we have here, they're going to have bilingual translations as well. So we will have them up on our webpage really soon, side by side. So that is available to everybody, especially folks who really need that in French, because I know that there's a very big lack of resources available in French. So we're going to make sure to have that included side by side, with our notes, resources, all of those.
Mm-hmm.
I want to now introduce Laura Hartley, who's the program director, to come on and speak a little bit about herself and go through a really important Zoom tutorial that I think a lot of are going to need, because we want to move our world online, and we're here together. And hopefully the brief Zoom tutorial will help you figure out what is on your screen and what functions that we're going to be using today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Hartley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the program director here at METRAC. I'm really excited and proud to be here and to be part of the TransFormed project. I've been working with Maisha and all the folks involved in the TransFormed project since March. And I know that we're all really excited to be here to share information and engage in dialogue with you today. I'm just really briefly going to share a few instructions about Zoom to help you with your experience of the webinar and symposium today. So as folks who are attendees, across the bottom of your screen, you should see these 3 buttons that I've put the picture of here on the slide: chat, raise hand, and Q&A. So the chat feature is if you just want to be in conversation with your fellow attendees or panelists with comments or things like that. We're asking that people use the Q&A function, which is the 3rd button on the bottom. If you have a question for the panelist or about any of the information that we're sharing, please use the Q&A function because it helps us as panelists keep track of the questions. We might not be able to get to them in real time right in the moment, but it will keep track of them for us. And we have some space built in at the end of the symposium today to get to questions. So we hope we'll be able to get to your questions then. If you have any technical issues, you can use the chat bar, and we have a staff member, Wendy from Metrac, who's monitoring that and who can try her best to help you out. And the last thing that I wanted to mention in terms of technical things is that we have spotlights on the folks who are talking, and we always have a spotlight on our ASL interpreters who will be switching through. When the screen is being shared as it is right now with the slideshow, you have an option in terms of how you view that. So if you hit side-by-side gallery, that means you'll see the little videos of the presenters stacked beside your screen. And then you can take your mouse and you can adjust the screen to make the people's faces bigger or smaller, depending on what you need to see. And if you need any help with this, please use the chat to let us know, and we'll do our best to support you. We also have note takers taking notes today, and we will be making those available after the symposium on our webpage. And the last thing I just want to quickly say is we just want to acknowledge that talking about violence can be hard, and we are going to be talking about violence today. And everyone's entitled to whatever feelings or not feelings that might bring up for you. We encourage you to take care of yourself in the best way that you know how in this moment. If you need to step away from your computer or take a break, please feel free to do that. We are going to be launching some resources today, including a resource on support services available for folks. So we'll be showing you how to have access to those resources as well. And then finally, I'm just going to briefly share the agenda with you. And then we're going to get into all of the amazing presentations that we have. So we've started off today with our introduction. We'll then be moving into introducing the project, hearing about some of the research on the project, and we'll be having Carolina Ganna and Eileen Hyman, 2 of our researchers, sharing that information. And Felix Kane will be discussing a concept of coercive feminization. We'll be having a presentation on translink. We'll be launching our TransFormed resources. Then we will be launching a new legal resource, wrapping up with a closing and hopefully some time for questions. And then we're going to take a very short break between 4 and 4:15. And then we're moving into our optional, so you can stay if you would like to, as we launch our webinar, supporting Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans survivors of intimate partner violence. And so I'm going to pass it back to Maisha to get us started on the official program.
Yeah, so we're going to now get started on talking a bit about the project structure, the methodology, some of our research findings, how our advisory committee and PLG model works. And to start that off, I want to introduce two of our PLG members, Tala and Felix, who are here today, to kind of just briefly say hello, introduce themselves, and then we are going to get into some of the information that Laura and I are going to be sharing with you.
Sorry, Maisha, did you need something from me right now? I've got the spotlights all up.
Oh, no, sorry. I think it froze for a second, so nobody was moving. So the fun adventures of Zoom. No, I was just saying I'd love for Felix and Tala to just say hi, and then we can get into talking about, you know, the structure and all the key information.
Felix, do you want to go first? I'm easy.
I'm good either way. I guess I'll go first. I'm Felix Kane. My pronouns are they and them, and I was on the peer leadership group for this project since the beginning. It's been a long ride. Tala.
Hi, I'm Tala Jalili. No pronouns or any pronouns, and like Felix, I've been here from the beginning. It was quite a journey. Hi.
Yeah, thank you both for being here. I think it's been 3 years. I can't believe how fast time flies, but yeah, thank you so much for being here and being present as we go over some of the key research findings and some information about the structure. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the approach that we took with this project. So the TransFormed project's methodology is unique in this approach. It's a participatory, action-oriented research project that is grounded in centering the experiences and expertise of two-spirit, non-binary, and trans community members who have experiences of intimate partner violence. So in order to achieve this, the project established the PLG, which is the peer leadership group, that has been guiding this project since the first year that it started. The group initially began with 10 members, but in its current status now, currently 6 community members who come from a diverse group of you know, backgrounds and intersections. They hold different experiences and identities, and all of them have worked so hard over the past 3 years to, you know, get us to where we are today, providing feedback and evaluation and information to, you know, bring you the resources that we have today. And I'm going to pass it over to Laura to talk a little bit about more on like the structure, and then I will get a little bit deeper into how the PLG and advisory model sort of worked for us.
Thanks, Maisha. So just very briefly, in addition to working with the members of the peer leadership group, the TransFormed project also worked with an advisory committee of over 20 organizations who work with two-spirit, non-binary, and trans folks. These individuals who represent these organizations on our advisory committee were able to offer us a service provider perspective while also sharing insights from their organizations have gained from working directly with folks within two-spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. So both the advisory committee and the peer leadership group have been foundational throughout the life of the entire project and in planning for today's symposium. And when we share the resources, I'll be able to scroll down and show you a list where you can click to link all of the different advisory committee member organizations.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about how the PLG and the AC model worked for us. So as I mentioned, we have 6 peers right now within our PLG group, and every idea that we've had, every kind of idea we've had to like progress forward to move to talk about the resources, to create them from the early stages of forming the PLG and then going into the phase of like getting survey participants, focus groups, individual interviews, and then working on actually finalizing the resources have all involved the PLG and AC. But the PLG play a more specific, I would say, intimate role in a lot of these phases. And we really tried to make sure, I would say, especially when I joined in early this year, that there was room for change and flexibility I think because often when we enter kind of this model, we have an idea of how meetings and things will go, but for us, it was really important to have room for that flexibility. And I think the resources and the information we have today are successful because we were able to integrate as many of those changes and like flexible situations as possible. Alongside METRAC staff kind of forming the structure of meetings and how sessions will go, we try to make sure that peers were involved in like the creation and like editing of agendas. So to make sure that we weren't just coming into a meeting with our ideas, but that the peer leadership group was able to kind of edit and fix that to make sure their voices were heard in the meetings. And you know, whether there was like successful meetings or conflicts, I would say I really tried to make sure that voices weren't just heard in the meetings, but that they were also heard through email and other forms of communication. That's something I really want to stress that is important, especially for those of you who are maybe wanting to create like a model like this. All forms of communication are really important, and you might not always get everything directly in your emails, in your meetings. So it's really important to have different directions and avenues of following up with folks. The advisory committee has over 20 organizations that serve Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. And the advisory committee, all the organizations played such an important role in providing their expertise, knowledge, and feedback to us. But it was unique in its own approach because I would say that all the organizations played different roles through the different phases that we were in, depending on their capacity. So we had a lot of groups who maybe early on in the stages of acquiring, like, us getting survey participants, focus group, and individual interview participants played a really big role in that. And then when we were in the phase of creating the resources, which was a very long phase, there were a lot of folks who were very active in that. And then other folks who were more active in the phase of us planning this symposium. As I mentioned earlier, we are in a very difficult and strange year where so many meetings and like conversations have had to move online. So we've really had to adapt to that situation, and our models have adapted to that as well. They worked very differently this year versus how they would have worked last year or the year before. But both PLG and advisory committees played a really big role in all phases of this project. And I know everyone at METRAC is really eternally thankful for everybody who was involved in the PLG and in the advisory committee. Although we have 6 peers, I also want to acknowledge everybody else who was active in like the first and second phase of the project, but wasn't able to make it over. All the METRAC staff, anyone who did any kind of work or training to support us on becoming more knowledgeable and educated on the things that we were discussing, our prior project coordinator, Tatiana Ferguson, everyone involved, some folks that you will hear from later today. Everyone played such an important role, and these models have, I think we're hoping that these models, in discussing this and talking about it, it's setting an example for what worked for us and what you can take and how you might want to apply this to future projects or things that you want to do similar to this.
So thank you for that introduction, Maisha. And we're now going to welcome and introduce Carolina Ganna to co-present with Maisha the qualitative research conducted as a part of TransFormed. So just let me shift around the spotlights here for a second, and then I can do the introduction. Okay, so welcome, Carolina.
Hi.
Carolina works from a gender-affirming and trans-positive embodied approach. Carolina is a cisgendered woman, is Latinx, and uses she, her pronouns. Carolina Ganna is a social worker and independent consultant who supports trauma-informed practices in all areas of service provision. Carolina worked closely with the TransFormed peer leadership group, steering committee, and qualitative research process. Carolina provides social work, psychotherapy to both English and Spanish-speaking folks in private practice and is committed to responding and supporting a healing process to survivors of gender-based violence. Welcome, Carolina.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
I'm just taking a moment to pull up our presentation.
Thanks. I'm leaning on you, Maisha.
Yeah. Hoping Zoom will continue to be on my side today.
Welcome everybody that's participating in this symposium. It's really lovely to be part of this and to have you all here.
Alrighty. So for this portion of the day, Carolina and I are going to take some time to go over the qualitative research. And a lot of it, is from the really amazing report that Carolina was able to put together for us. So I'm really looking forward to discussing, direct feedback and quotes and like prevention information that folks in the focus groups and individual interviews provided to us. So I want to start off this presentation talking about the peer-led engagement that we had in our community-based research. So as I kind of mentioned before, the peer leadership group acted as active members of the research, and they were a pivotal and really core important part of all the TransFormed project activities. They enhanced the representation of our community members in this research process, and the main PLG role in this research process included reviewing, editing, reshaping research questions, as like in all like capacities that they could, building workshops that focused on anti-oppressive, anti-racist trauma practices, participating in group facilitation, reflective practices, individual interviewing skills, as well as making sure that they were like involved in participant wellness and like practices related to that supported the safety and stability of themselves, but also the folks that we were working with during the research process. Through this model, we were able to have PLG co-facilitate a lot of the individual interviews and focus groups alongside Carolina and some other MetTrack staff. And so some of the other folks that we had were trauma-informed social workers, and we also had an Indigenous community worker and a Francophone community worker, depending on what specific focus group we were hosting. They also really supported in note-taking during interviews, gathering themes, during and after the interviews, reviewing transcripts, coding transcripts, and developing broader themes. So that was a really core part of this as well for PLG to be able to learn and engage in that process. So in that way, they're kind of building those skills while they're also providing all this work and information for the community. So in terms of who facilitated the focus groups and the individual interviews, the interview facilitators consisted of members of the TransFormed Peer Leadership Project, the Two-Spirit community worker, as I mentioned, 2 Francophone community workers, and a consulting trauma-informed worker. So the research project was able to hold 3 different focus groups, trans femme and trans women of color, a mixed focus group, and a Two-Spirit focus group. The research held 4 individual interviews. So the Francophone interview was co-facilitated by 2 Francophone community workers, and the 3 individual interviews were co-facilitated by PLG members, and of course, like trauma-informed workers, and 1 interview was facilitated by a social worker with an ASL interpreter. And the total number of participants that we had with the focus group and the individual interviews combined was 18.
Thanks, Maisha. So one of the things that we started to fundamentally recognize, there are 2 parts to the research project. One was the qualitative and the other is the quantitative, which Eileen will go through after this presentation. So the qualitative portion of the research really focused on areas or be that participant gaps that we started to see within the survey. And so the survey was the quantitative research. And the qualitative research which is the interviews, the individual interviews and the focus groups. That was where we came to see what focus groups would we require to be able to really capture intersectional identities, to really be able to capture some of the gaps of the survey, such as, folks be over the age of like 30 plus, 50, regional, folks that live in different sort of areas of the GTA, sort of outside of the downtown core. So these were important aspects to why it is that we had specific focus groups in particular. We also really wanted to have an opportunity to speak and to engage with the deaf community as well, gender diverse deaf community. And so this is a big piece as to that last slide as to why you saw the particular range of a focus group. So when we think of, you know, processes in research, one of the things is that we really wanted to zone into was how do we do this research in a trauma-informed way, in a participatory way with representation of community. So we structured it in a way that held, I'm going to put this word quite frankly, a deep essence of kindness and care to the processes. So we offered meals, we did snacks, we right in the welcoming introduced ourselves, our names, our preferred pronouns. We had all aspects of the research documentation, so the questions, the consent forms, confidentiality, demographic form to fill, all available for participants right away in a, you know, within a folder. So folks were able to know exactly what they were, sort of, lack of a better word, but kind of getting into what they were going to, what the process would look like right from the beginning. And we started in that way to really host that place of safety, stability, transparency, choice, collaboration. People had questions, they can have them right at the beginning. And that was a significant, valuable process in this research. Now, one of the things as we move forward and go into this presentation, I'm just going to invite all the folks that are participating in this symposium over the next 3 days, that just a real gentle sort of invitation of the ways that you might gather information and bringing in an opportunity for a call to action. So there's lots of rich information that participants filled us in on and let us know and recommended for differing ways of responding to partner violence. And as we move along in this presentation, we will see and we will be with and we will hear those recommendations. And so the invitation I have for you all today is to kind of zone into the few bits of recommendations that might actually be doable in the work that you do, in the agencies that you work with, or in any kind of realm of service provision or personhood that you are.
Thank you, Carolina. Yeah, I think before we get into some of the direct like call to action items that we have, we want to take some time to share with you direct quotes from folks and from those who attended the focus groups and interviews, because I think in a lot of spaces it's hard to come across you know, direct quotes like this, and we thought it would be really important to share that with you, because there are so many themes and commonalities that we found amongst the different groups. So in front of you, you'll be able to see, in terms of experiences of community supports, I want to pinpoint and highlight a couple of quotes that really, I think, stood out to us and cover a lot of the other materials. So for example, someone said in a focus group, as a deaf person, there aren't a lot of resources available for deaf people in general. You know, interpreters, services like hotlines, phone services, shelters that are accessible, being able to sit with counselors and social workers, really like being able to have those accommodations in a comfortable and safe way. And, you know, someone else is saying, like, when we know this, like, violence is physically, mentally, and spiritually really impactful. It impacts you in all of those ways, and there needs to be workshops on how to keep yourself safe in all those three ways. And you know, some of the challenges with some of these workshops might be that you know, they may or may not be long enough. So there was many conversations around lengths of workshops, programs, that short-term supports and solutions are really ultimately sometimes unhelpful. Folks are wanting to have longer extended sessions where they can get deeper into things, where that people can be followed up with, where a continuation of care model is applied. like moving forward to discriminative and oppressive barriers and that what impact that has on health. The first quote you can see is someone saying, you know, I did not phone the police because I was afraid that they didn't know how to sign. Plus, our experiences as Indigenous folks are that we've had barriers to services that should protect us, like the police and other services. Someone else said, how do I find supports if I've been in an abusive poly relationship? And then on top of that, you know, how to find support if you have been in those abusive poly relationships with other trans and non-binary people. Because a lot of the discourse in domestic violence centers is centered around the dynamic of, you know, a man, like a cis man abusing me or someone of a masculine figure. So what happens, you know, within the community when folks of different gender identities and sexual orientations are coming together saying, you know, someone has been abused or someone is also the one who is causing abuse. I think there's so much room for nuance and complexity that hasn't been explored. And we see that it is damaging and impacting people in a negative way because they're having to negotiate and leave behind so many things. And that is not creating the safe space, the safer space that they need to be able to voice all their concerns and be heard. In terms of social exclusion and marginalization, you know, social exclusion and social isolation were big themes that came up in focus groups. I was present for a focus group where a lot of folks in that group said that there was an issue of isolation or loneliness or like lack of companionship. So how are those things discussed and how are they brought up in the spaces like programming and workshops? Because that does have a big impact on how people are accessing services. You know, who do they turn to? Who is supporting folks in terms of accessing that? What happens when folks are at programs or workshops and they get all this information, but they have nobody to safely lean on? And to finish off the, you know, direct quotes and like taking a look at them, just in a broad sense, representation matters. People want to know that their gender identity, their sexual identity, all the other intersections of their identities are, you know, for them to, like, to safely be able to express that and talk about that is really important. You know, folks having to negotiate identities, there's a saying like leave them at the door, and then coming into spaces where they don't see themselves represented, maybe in staff, in ads, or in like the materials that exist at in these programs or workshops, that's having such a huge impact on, firstly, who is showing up to these things, but also who isn't. You know, a lot of folks will come to get help, but they won't come back. A lot of folks don't even get in through the door to get help because they're looking at, you know, staff or materials or representation and saying, you know, am I wanted here? Can I come here? Can I come to this space to get help? Can I come to these staff members and these places and talk about what I need to talk about?
Thanks. You know, when we look at the quotes and when we look at recommendation, this is the really important and valuable part of the TransFormed project, was to offer, you know, on all scales of you know, GTA, the province, across Canada, just how we can hear what folks are saying and really implement these aspects into our work. And a big part in this particular research, this process within the research had a deep element and the essence of, you know, the question of what do you recommend? Like, what do you recommend? What do you recommend for change? What do you recommend for preventative practices? And so here we have a range of recommendations. There's a few slides on this, and I'll read out a few, and they are entirely available. This is a document for the public. And so this is that invitation, that call to action of, like, you might see a few things that are like, that is doable, that I can shift and change and actually do that when I consider my range of service provision and how I work with folks and how I support community. So fundamentally is this, and we're gonna utilize this language of intersectionality. So intersectionality is all those ranges of our identities, those aspects of identity of race, gender, those ability, those, you know, regionality, indigeneity, and the important part of how resources, and when we're referring to relationship for non-binary, trans, people of color, in two-spirit folks, how resources are actually capturing that whole myriad scope of identity. And so you're going to see that in particular a lot of the range of the recommendations. So the consideration of all aspects of identity and how the service will provide and meet those ranges. A big piece in this research, and lots that was spoken about and that I take deeply as a service provider and as a personhood, is that aspect of the nuances of what identity do I have to choose in order to access something. And if we continue to limit how we provide service to folks, then it does detriment to a person's health, that aspect. And so this is that there's an element and there's a theme that we generated with the PLG group around negotiating identity. So which identity gets me through the door, but that's not all of who I am, and that was a big piece of what was being shared upon. So support groups and resources should be all inclusive. The deep need and the value of the importance of traditional healers and traditional Indigenous healers specific, and safety planning, this important element of, there's lots of ranges of safety planning material that exists when we speak about intimate partner violence. But we need to notice the range of cisgendered lens that has, the heteronormative lens that has, you know, the white skin privilege that has in when we're referring the classes lens that those have in safety planning, and how it might actually look quite differently in what we can include in terms of gender diversity and working with people of color. The other element is affordable access to formal education for trans individuals. And also to be able to provide a better service to the community in the sense of having representation and leadership roles. So in what way are trans BIPOC folks in leadership roles, and what space do agencies actually offer so that our hiring looks different, so that our mission and vision statements look different? We often think of those things when we look into strat planning, all that kind of stuff, and make those changes happen. A big piece that was spoken about too, it was shelters. So also the ways in which making safe spaces for folks to be able to access shelters that are fundamentally trans, non-binary, and two-spirit spaces for shelter, for just safe refuge when it comes to looking for a place to be able to flee in a moment, right? So again, as a participant had mentioned, LGBT, two-spirit, queer, service provider representation in shelters, therapists, caseworkers, counselors. An important essence is, and these are really valuable in terms of zoning into accessibility for deaf ASL. So everything from interpretation symbols on our websites, interpretation symbols on our front doors, braille symbol, accessibility symbol, so that a person doesn't have to go searching for whether or not you'll accommodate those needs. And so the visibility of those symbols to be present. And again, for support groups, for trans folks, for non-binary folks, for two-spirit folks that are 30 plus, there are many groups that are for 29 and under, and even though there's a recognition that we have folks 50, 60 that are deeply also requiring support groups that zone into gender identity fundamentally. And another big recommendation is ongoing training for workers, ongoing training for agencies. So in summary, though there's a lot of wording in this slide, this is information that I sort of cut and paste on 5 core points when we were doing research discussion in particular. One of the things I'm going to highlight are sort of the last sentences or pick up certain sentences from these points. So in point number 1, the current lack of representation and gender diverse visibility within service provision was expressed as unsafe for many participants. So let's just sit with that for a bit, perceive that, see it, and kind of notice what can be a shift in our action of change. In the second point, this is sort of these compacting dynamics. So the compacting dynamic is as follows. So when seeking services, participants' health and wellness outcomes were interlinked with service providers' approaches to serving gender diversity and intersectional identities. Some of the more vulnerable and disenfranchised circumstances and experiences, such as exclusion from family and social networks and isolation from gender diverse communities, merged with transphobia, gender binarism, racism, and ableism, heightened complex impacts to health. So this is where folks really spoke about increased suicidality, depression, felt sense of isolation, and significant distrust, just to name a few. So here we have a sort of the compounding aspects of disenfranchisement that takes place on all ends that were really spoken about by participants. What we noticed in both the survey and within the interviews, some of the things that participants were really highlighting was the essence of the emotional, psychological, and mental health impacts in the experiences of violence, and that many times we're referring to violence not just as within one aspects of one partnership. We're referring to violence in so many sort of ranges. The site of violence that might have happened in a dynamic, relational dynamic of dating, a relational dynamic of poly, a relational dynamic of sex work, and a relational dynamic of long-term intimate relationships, and then the compounding part around system or structural violence that has taken place in terms of response of oppression or discrimination, etc., racism. So I'm going to go to the 5th point in particular, but specifically for Black, Indigenous, people of color participants, and this is what I wanted to highlight before, is that this negotiating of needs or selecting parts of the self-identity to seek supports and having to choose one aspect of one's identity to select to access supports was a complex venture. And so fundamentally, they're left with very little or no meaningful resources to improve upon health. And that's something that we really wanted to tease out and noticed within the PLG. It was sort of an ongoing theme that showed up within our interviews. So I like to think of endings as also beginnings, because there's a real important sort of continuity that we want to offer. So as we sort of wrap up this presentation, as we wrap up this essence of this project, we really place that openness onto now the larger of the community, all of you folks that are participating in this symposium. We know that, or what we became aware of, was the importance of systemic and structural changes that are needed to better support the myriad needs of Two-Spirit, trans, and non-binary folks. So we ask that we deeply listen to this, and we ask that you take the insights that are illustrated by the participants in this project and really see the different ways that we can do this work as helpers or as caseworkers or as whatever role you have in the profession and the personhood that you are. I really want to thank you for hearing me out, and I deeply, deeply want to thank the participants of this project, PLG members, MetTrack. Thank you for funders. It's lovely seeing you in different meetings, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Carolina, and I appreciate you echoing that call to action component, because the first step is really, it's great that folks are here listening to this, but the next step, the hardest step, is really to take this back as like an individual person, but also to your teams, to say we really need to go through these call to actions and see what we can change in our mandates and policies. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much to both Maisha and Carolina for that presentation. And I know there's questions coming up in the chat, in the question and answer, and we will hopefully have time at the end of today to address some questions on the research together. I'm excited now to be able to introduce our next presentation from Eileen Hyman. Eileen Hyman is a researcher and professor affiliated with the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, University of Ottawa, and York University. The vast majority of Eileen's research addresses health equities in under-researched and equity-seeking communities. Eileen has conducted extensive research on partner violence and barriers to help seeking among immigrants and racialized communities in Canada. Between 2017 and 2019, Eileen worked with Rainbow Health Ontario on projects examining the needs of gender diverse children and evaluating the Trans Health Expansion Project, aimed at increasing access to gender affirming surgeries in Ontario. Welcome, Eileen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm really excited to be here to share some of the findings of our research, and particularly the online survey findings. You can see that research was a really important part of this project. We conducted research to better understand the unique experiences of, I'm going to say, various community members experiencing partner violence, that's IPV, to understand the barriers and facilitators that influenced help seeking among these communities, to inform the development of the health promotion interventions that are being presented today, and to develop and launch new trainings and this knowledge exchange symposium for both community members and service providers. And you can hear from the previous presentation and for I'm presenting today, we really made efforts to use like ethical, trauma-informed, community-based, and mixed methods in our research to conduct this research. So I did want to mention that the research component did include many different sources of data. We first conducted a literature review to better understand, or not to better understand, to see what research had been previously done with these communities, and to understand barriers to help seeking what was published in the academic research. We also conducted an environmental scan to see what sorts of health promotion tools have already been developed. Are there great best practices out there that we would be able to adapt or modify for this project? Are there trainings, or were there trainings that were successfully used with other service organizations to bring attention to address the specific needs of these communities? We conducted key informant interviews with service providers. Some of you might be on the Zoom, to find out from the perspective of service providers in the violent sector, what were the needs that you saw for us to address in developing the interventions. We did focus groups and individual interviews, which Carolina just presented the rich information on, and the online survey, which I will present the findings on today. And all of these sources together were used to inform the interventions that we see as being that we're hopeful that will have a great impact on the community. And I did want to acknowledge again that the research methods and the tools were all co-developed by the research team, the project coordinator, Tatiana Ferguson, and the PLG working together. So in terms of the data collected by the online survey, you can see that we collected a wide range of data, demographic information on the participants. We collected health and social information to identify the range of social isolation, discrimination, substance use, HIV status, sex work, disability among the survey participants. We wanted to better understand people's own understanding of what partner violence means, what language, behaviors, actions it takes, and to the extent to which this is a problem in trans, non-binary, two-spirit communities. We wanted to know where participants were currently going to get help in terms of their relationships and prevention of abuse. We wanted to know what services were currently accessed. We were interested in learning about people's experiences with partner violence and the impacts it was having on their lives. And finally, where people are going for formal and informal help in cases where violence was experienced. So just in terms of who responded to the survey, I have to thank the PLG again and all the members of the advisory committee for helping to share information about the survey. We had wonderful outreach. At the end, we reached 136 survey respondents in both English and French. The average or a high proportion of the survey respondents were under 30, but there was kind of, quite a significant proportion were older than 30. The majority of respondents were in a relationship, however it was defined. A third were single. In terms of ethnicity, a little over a third of the respondents were racialized. You can see the mix there, and 3% were Indigenous. In terms of geography, the majority were located in downtown Toronto, but there were also respondents from Peel, from North York, from other areas of within the GTA. And you can see that the majority of survey respondents could be classified as low income, under $20,000 a year. And you can see from the demographic, how the demographic overview also informed the way we approached reaching people for the focus groups and for the interviews, to hear the voices, to make sure that we were hearing voices of people that might have been underrepresented in the demographics for the survey. I did want to note these two figures here because you can see in terms of gender identity, the project's called TransFormed, addressing partner violence in two-spirit, trans and non-binary communities, but people identified their gender much more broadly. You can see that almost half identified as non-binary. There are a high proportion of respondents who identified as trans women, trans men, two-spirit, but quite a significant proportion as well would have considered their identities to be gender questioning, gender non-conforming, or something else, 1 in 5. In terms of sexual orientation, you can see again, people identify their sexual orientation in many different ways, the majority being queer, but other sexual orientations were represented as well. I think this slide is also important. It will reinforce some of the information that Carolina just presented. But we asked respondents, is your ability to access services affected by any of the following? And you can see within the respondents, the 136 respondents, 3/4 identified having a mental health issue. More than, quite almost a third identified as having a chronic or long-term illness, physical disability, learning disabilities, other types of conditions that affected their ability to use information and services were affected. And I think that we have to consider those in developing services and interventions. You can also see that a fair proportion of the survey respondents were using substances to help them cope with stress and trauma. Almost half felt socially isolated. Quite a high proportion experienced transphobia often or very often. Almost more than a third experienced discrimination very often or often. Fortunately, smaller proportions were HIV positive and engaging in unwanted sex or sexual activities in exchange for food, money, place to sleep, or access to services. So just getting into the meat of what we were asking, one of the first sections was about awareness of IPV. We really wanted to know what kinds of language, actions, and behaviors did respondents consider to be abusive in a relationship. And you can see this, the findings are not so surprising. They just validate that participants recognize that abuse takes many forms. It could be verbal, it could be emotional, it could be sexual, financial, cyberbullying is there. So what abuse is was widely recognized, but there were other types of language or behavior also considered to be abusive. And the most common written in response to that question was gaslighting. And also in terms of awareness of IPV, we asked two questions. We asked, do you think that partner violence is a problem in these communities, in your communities? And you can see that 61.7% of respondents are saying this is a major problem. And 1 in 5, 20.8% are saying it's somewhat of a problem. When we asked, like, how much of a priority do you think it is to address partner violence in your communities? You can see that 18.3% are saying it's the most important priority for your communities, but even half are saying it might not be the most important problem, but it really is a top priority. So these findings really just support the fact that the findings show that this is a major issue for these communities and important to address, so that research is timely. Another big section of the survey was asking people, well, like, where do you currently go for information on healthy relationships or prevention of abuse? And you can see that 61% of survey respondents had looked for information. They were looking for specific information about relationships, being a two-spirit, non-binary, trans, gender non-conforming, or gender questioning person. People were looking for information about improving relationships, recognizing signs of abuse, how to avoid getting hurt, how to stay safe, where to go for help, legal rights, a whole range of issues. And as we saw in the presentation that preceded, people want this information in workshops, through educational events, community panels, places where people can come together and share experiences. We asked the respondents, well, what kinds of resources are you currently using to help with relationships? And you can see quite a fair proportion of survey respondents are using counseling, either individual, couples, families, sexual health counseling. Quite a high proportion are using self-help resources, help with relationship communication skills, and peer support programs. So those are the main kinds of resources that are currently being accessed. And again, as we heard before, in terms of appropriateness of resources, things like accessibility and safety and specificity and representation were very important in terms of the resources that people preferred. So the next section is a little bit, it might be disturbing to some people, but we asked, there were a couple of questions that we asked tools to measure people's actual experience, the prevalence of violence in these communities. And overall, there were 81, that's 4 out of 5 respondents that had experienced abuse during their lifetime, and 44.3% who had experienced abuse in the past 2 years. And we knew from the literature review that these proportions were higher than what we had seen reported in other studies, and higher than rates of abuse that are reported in the Canadian population as a whole. And when we look at the types of abuse that were reported, we can see that the highest proportion of abuse reported was emotional abuse, followed by gender identity abuse, followed by sexual abuse, gender identity abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse. And approximately a third of respondents attributed the abuse that they received to their gender identity or expression. We also asked about how abuse impacted on their lives, and some of this supports what we just heard from the previous presentation, but it was very apparent that the impacts of partner violence on these community members are profound. 89.3% reported like a mental health issue, 41% had issues with substance abuse, 41% had housing issues, financial problems. So again, this just supports that it's not just the experience of the abuse itself, but it impacts on many different aspects of people's lives that need to be addressed when we're developing interventions. This is the last section. We asked respondents who were experiencing abuse, where they went, who they turned to for help or support, either formal or informal, from family and friends. We saw quite a high proportion, 38.8%, turn to family or friends for help, but not all, because as we see, sometimes people's have to create new kinds of support systems if they might be estranged from their from current family members. And we saw over a half had used formal services. And you can see on the right what were the main formal services that were accessed by respondents. You can see the highest proportion had accessed mental health services, but also a fair proportion had used police services, hospital emergency rooms, legal services, school-based counseling services, victim support services. But I think because of these low proportions, except for mental health services, we might ask ourselves, why aren't formal help services being more readily used by community members who are experiencing violence? And some of the answers we can see in this next slide. We asked, well, what are the main barriers to help seeking? And you can see quite a high proportion of respondents are saying that they don't trust resources or supports, that the resources aren't responsive to their needs, that resources aren't inclusive, that responses aren't perceived as being welcoming. And there's a lot more data, which is very rich, which can answer some of these questions, but just given the time, I'm going to just summarize some of the main findings from the online survey. And that is that addressing IPV partner violence is a priority issue for these communities. And the findings reinforce the importance of raising community awareness and community engagement to normalize different kinds of relationships and speaking out, and increasing access to information and resources that can help reduce both like the risk of IPV and the impacts of IPV. And finally, the findings strongly suggest that it's really important to reduce the barriers to help seeking and develop services that are, it's interesting when I tried to summarize what people were saying they really want in resources. They want them to be trans-competent, representative, which we just heard in the previous presentation, informed by lived experience, trauma-informed, to consider intersectionality because people's social identities intersect with their experiences of discrimination and the larger systems of oppression that create risk and create barriers to help seeking. And they want services and resources to be accessible, both from a financial, geographic, cultural, and an ethical point of view. And I think the last presentation had really, really, really rich quotes from the participants, but I was just going to end with a couple of comments that people wrote in to say. They said, I honestly never see people like myself at all represented. I can't even imagine it. What would help the most is knowing the person I'm seeing is good at working with trans people, using varieties of pronouns, documenting systems that ensure the use of proper name, no mess ups of legal name. Just because people post a rainbow flag sticker doesn't mean they know how to be helpful. So I'm going to end here. I'm happy to take any questions. I also, as what was previously said, like I'm hoping that these findings will help to transform systems so that they will be better able to meet the needs of trans community members moving forward and address the systemic and structural changes that are needed. And thank you for this opportunity. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Eileen, for your presentation. There aren't currently questions in the Q&A, but if some come up, then we'll make sure to loop back to you, hopefully at the end today to answer. And I just wanted to add in for folks that an integrated research report with both the quantitative survey data findings and the qualitative findings is available on the TransFormed webpage, which we will be showing you how to access shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to now introduce Felix, one of our peer leadership members, to briefly touch on the topic of coercive feminization, which we will get to more in depth on day 3, but Felix is here to kind of give you a preview of what that conversation might look like.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Felix, and I coined the phrase coercive feminization in 2004. I designed this to speak to the specific intersections of misogyny and non-binary transness as experienced by people who are assigned female at birth. So facing the misogyny without being a woman. This language was created as not to appropriate existing terms like transmisogyny, which is exclusive to trans feminine people and those assigned male at birth. The term coercively feminized was intended to be added onto the phrase women and femmes to create acknowledgement of how non-women and non-femme AFAB people are often lumped in with these groups while discussing gender-based violence. When we think about that, that lumping that happens is itself an act of misgendering and therefore violence, but it's never acknowledged. It allows us to speak to the absolute scarcity of services or consideration for trans men and trans masculine survivors of violence, and allows us to navigate the ways in which AFAB labor is demanded and claimed by organizations, while AFAB genders are erased and unwelcomed. The hope is that future studies will be able to examine how this intersection impacts violence faced within gender diverse communities, and that more supports will become accessible. On Thursday, I will be talking more to this pervasive, unexamined, and unacknowledged systemic form of violence, speaking to the long and ongoing history of AFAB erasure within non-binary and trans communities, and the ways coercive feminization can present in gender diverse communities. I will also be exploring how this term may help us address the current resistance to gender inclusion in survivor and feminist spaces. So we're going to be talking about TERFs. I look forward to speaking with you on the third day of this symposium. And if you have any questions, I will be available at the end for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to day 3 and getting more into that. Thank you for this preview.
Thank you.
I'm really happy now to introduce Janice and Joseph from Women's College Hospital. I'm going to go over their bios a little bit, and then I will let them take it away with the presentation. So Joseph Friedman Burley is the TransLink project coordinator at the Ontario Network of Sexual Assault Domestic Violence Treatment Centers. He has worked with a number of organizations committed to improving 2L's LGBTQ+ health through research, policy, education, and advocacy. A recent MPH graduate, Joseph is excited to build a career working in community-based research that promotes health equity for 2S LGBTQ+ communities. He is grateful for this opportunity to share his work, connect, and collaborate. Janice Dumont is a senior scientist at Women's College Research Institute of Women's College Hospital and professor in the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, where she is also director of the Collaborative Specialization in Women's Health. Her work focuses on addressing the health responses to sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and the abuse of older adults through the development and evaluation of innovative programs of care and curricula. In recognition of her international impact in the field of gender-based violence, she was recently awarded the International Association of Forensic Nurses Distinguished Fellow Award and the Nursing Network on Violence Against Women International's Excellence in Policy and Practice Award. Thank you both for being here.
Hi, thank you so much, Aisha and Laura, for that welcome and warm introduction. It's actually just going to be me presenting today. So I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. Can we all see that? Okay, excellent. So again, yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very, very pleased to be able to present to you all on our program of research, which we really like to think of as a kind of companion project to the amazing work being carried out by METRAC and with the TransFormed project. We are really, really grateful to be able to contribute to a more coordinated and collaborative response to this broader public health issue, which is violence against trans communities. So we like to think of ourselves as operating in a different but related niche within that broader kind of umbrella issue. So as such, we will be talking today about topics that are difficult for some, including experiences of transphobia in the healthcare system. So as Laura mentioned earlier, please do take care of yourself in the way that feels right for you if you do need to. Additionally, we'd like to acknowledge that in this project, we have used trans as an umbrella term based on the feedback of our advisory group of trans community members. So in this work, trans is used to describe individuals who do not identify with their sex assigned at birth. That is anyone who is not cisgender. And that, for example, includes non-binary, two-spirit, gender diverse, gender queer, and gender fluid folks. However, we do, of course, recognize that language is important and always evolving, and we continue to consult on our language with our community partners. Additionally, our research at every stage has included the invaluable knowledge, insights, and lived experiences of trans communities who have contributed to this work variably as peer advisors, core members of the research team, advisory group members, and representatives of participating organizations. So I'd just like to say that today I'm representing a much larger group of individuals who have participated in this work at different points and in different ways over the last 3 years. Over the course of this research, we've also been very, very fortunate to collaborate with some amazing organizations who support trans communities across the province, some of which are represented here. And now I'd like to begin by providing some context to our program of research. So as I'm sure many of us are aware, sexual assault against trans persons is a pervasive and pernicious problem. For instance, a large population-based study in the US, the United States 2015 Transgender Survey, indicated that 47% of trans individuals experienced sexual assault in their lifetime. A smaller survey in 2004 by Forge, which is a trans-led anti-violence organization in the US, further found that trans populations experience sexual violence very often as a direct result of their gender identity. And now we'd like to showcase some of the amazing work done by the recent Canadian Trans Pulse study. So of the more than 2,800 trans and non-binary people who responded to this recent Canadian Trans Pulse survey, 26% had experienced sexual assault in the previous 5 years. In the United States National College Health Assessment Survey, it was reported that trans persons may be more than 4 times as likely than those who identified as male to have experienced rape. And additionally, they are more than twice as likely to experience relationship sexual abuse than that reported by those identifying as female on this particular survey. So transsexual assault survivors may have complex and unique needs in navigating treatment and support services, as they can differ from other survivors on a number of factors, including, for example, body configurations, histories of depression, previous suicide attempts, experiences of discrimination, and social supports. And yet, despite these high rates of sexual assault and their often complex care needs post-victimizations, trans survivors also often do not seek care. For example, in the Ford survey that we just mentioned, only 9% of trans survivors received professional medical care for their physical injuries, and only 14% received professional emotional support within the first week after being assaulted. When trans persons do seek care, they've often rated their interactions with healthcare providers as negative. The US National Transgender Discrimination Survey, for instance, found that respondents faced significant hurdles in accessing care. For example, 19% of respondents on this survey reported being refused care due to their trans identity, with this proportion even higher among trans people of color. 28% of respondents were subjected to harassment in medical settings, including emergency departments, and 50% reported having to teach their medical providers about some aspect of their health needs. Qualitative studies of trans clients' experiences of mistreatment in healthcare settings reinforce these findings, and we actually just heard some really harrowing examples in the presentation on TransFormed. So here we've described, or listed rather, a recent qualitative study from the US in which one participant stated, once you disclose, it becomes question after question. They feel like it's just open season, like they can say whatever they want, ask whatever they want, whether it's appropriate or inappropriate. So I'd now like to shift focus a bit onto the program of research that we have undertaken to improve the response to transsexual assault survivors. The goal of our program of research has always been to ensure that trans survivors receive affirming care. And by trans affirming care, what we mean is care that comprises the practices that recognize, account for, and address the unique experiences and needs of trans persons. One of our key collaborators in this research has been the Ontario Network of Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Treatment Centres. These are also known as SADVTCs. So our trans-related research with the network and other collaborators has encompassed 4 phases to date, as you can see on the slide. So in phase 1 of our research, we established the need for trans-specific training for nurses across the sexual assault centers, or SADVTCs. And we also established, and this is really key, the need for increased collaboration among SADVTCs and LGBTQI2S+ services in their regions. And then in phase 2, we developed and evaluated an in-person training with 47 SADVTC nurses, as can be seen in a 3-minute video developed by a student on our team named Megan Saad, and I will show that video to you now.
Trans populations experience disproportionately high rates of sexual victimization, have historically faced discrimination by healthcare providers, and may have unique and diverse needs post-victimization. In Ontario, a quarter of trans people seeking care at a hospital emergency department have been ridiculed, and 1 in 5 trans persons avoided emergency departments because of previous discrimination or fear of experiencing discrimination. A 2017 survey across Ontario's 35 hospital-based violence treatment centres, which provide comprehensive healthcare, psychosocial, medical, and forensic examination services for sexual assault survivors, found that 96% of specially trained forensic nurses strongly agreed that there was a need for training in the care of trans survivors of sexual assault. To address this gap, Women's College Research Institute and the Ontario Network of Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Treatment Centres, in collaboration with Rainbow Health Ontario, a province-wide program aimed at improving the health of LGBT persons in Ontario, have been developing a novel curriculum for sexual assault nurse examiners in the care of trans persons who have been sexually assaulted. With funding from the Women's Exchange 15K Challenge, a specialized curriculum entitled Providing Trans-Affirming Care for Sexual Assault Survivors was developed. The curriculum drew on skills-based competencies that were adapted from recommendations in the U.S. Department of Justice National Protocol for Sexual Assault Medical Forensic Examinations and endorsed by Forge, a transgender anti-violence advocacy group. The curriculum's 31 competencies were finalized by an advisory group of trans community members and their allies who subsequently aided in the development of the curriculum. The curriculum includes a training manual, training module, and facilitator's guide that includes case studies and interactive discussion components to facilitate learning. The curriculum was successfully piloted and evaluated on November 21st, 2018, with 47 nurses during the biannual sexual assault nurse examiner training for frontline nursing staff. Quantitative data collected from pre- and post-test questionnaires showed that although almost a quarter of participants indicated that they had provided direct clinical care to a trans client in the past, over 70% of participants indicated that they had not undergone any prior training on providing care for trans clients. After the training, participants reported on average a significant increase in their overall perceived level of expertise in trans-affirming post-sexual assault care. Participant scores on competence improved significantly across all domains of the curriculum: initial assessment, medical care, forensic examination, and discharge and referral. Qualitative feedback revealed that participants recognized the significance of this training. One participant indicated, "This training is incredibly relevant and important. This should be available and mandatory for healthcare providers everywhere."
Excellent. So after we developed and piloted and evaluated that in-person training, we wanted to make it more accessible. So we adapted it to an online format to expand its reach to all SADVTC nurses working across the province. And this e-learning curriculum, which we created using a program called Storyline Articulate 360, has been evaluated as well. And we also saw positive changes across all skills-based competencies as we did in the in-person training. So some changes with the e-learning curriculum is that unlike the in-person curriculum, it has these kind of interactive components, including game-based learning activities, a glossary, some embedded content, these information boxes, case studies and reflection questions, other various types of knowledge checks, and importantly, downloadable resources, including a companion training manual that participants can refer back to following completion of the training. So following the creation and launch of the e-learning curriculum, and in order to address the need identified earlier, which was for SADVTCs to better connect and collaborate with LGBTQI2S+ services in their regions, we undertook the TransLink project to build an intersectoral network on trans-affirming practice. So this network will aid in ensuring that organizations across Ontario in the health and social service sectors collaborate to offer up-to-date, appropriate, and sensitive care and supports to trans survivors. As of now, and we're really happy to say, the network comprises over 130 organizations from across the province. So the network is actually guided by a model. We're not just making this up as we go. It's guided by the life cycle model for network development, which is an evidence-informed tool endorsed by the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools. And as you can see on this slide, the life cycle model includes sequential stages for planning, formation, maturation, sustainability, and transition of a network. And as you can also see here, at each stage of the network development, there are several key activities proposed. So in the planning stage of the network, our first stage, we focused on determining core members and defining the purpose of the network. And to do that, we connected leaders from health and social service organizations to managers of Ontario's SADVTCs in 7 regional meetings held over the summer of 2019 in Toronto, Mississauga, North York, London, Ottawa, Sudbury, and Thunder Bay. The meetings were incredible. They provided an opportunity for us to share our recently developed nursing curriculum, trans-affirming nursing curriculum, and also to engage service providers in a broader discussion about the purpose, structure, and potential activities of this network that we were trying to form. So for this stage, we had 106 representatives attend from 96 distinct organizations. Following the planning stage, we continued to build the network in the formation stage of the life cycle model. We further negotiated its identity and developed a sense of shared ownership among network members. For example, informed by critical insights that we gleaned across the regional meetings, we developed and circulated a survey to all network members to gather information on their organizational characteristics, what they perceived to be barriers and facilitators to intersectoral collaboration, and the network's potential focus and identity, including activities, deliverables, and its mission, vision, and values. And as you can see on this slide, we developed a nice kind of infographic to display and represent the core values of the TransLink network as they were expressed in this survey. So we are currently now in the maturation stage, which is the 3rd stage of the life cycle model. And this stage is devoted to really focusing network action and activities and critically expanding the network's membership. So there are a bunch of moving parts with this stage of the project, but I'd like to conclude by briefly focusing on one, which is the TransLink web portal. So we circulated a survey to network members to gather data on the availability, accessibility, and trustworthiness of online information related to the care and support of trans survivors. And we also asked about the importance of various resources and features that we might consider including in like a TransLink web portal for all members in the broader public. So based on insights from that survey, we've been constructing the TransLink web portal, and we've attached some screenshots to this slide. As you can see, the web portal has a pretty wide array of content, including guidelines and an interactive membership directory. The directory could be used by service providers and trans survivors to locate and access appropriate services in their region, as well as act as a referral tool. So that will really help, we hope, promote intersectoral collaboration between sexual assault nurses across Ontario's SADVTCs and local LGBTQI2S+ resources and supports in their community. The web portal also includes a section where users can apply to become members of the network, which we anticipate will aid in growing and expanding our membership and enhancing our collaborative efforts to support trans survivors. Just to finish off briefly, ultimately we believe that the TransLink network could have a profound and really positive impact on health equity for trans survivors. The network has the potential to take a provincial lead in a robust and coordinated effort that ensures the provision of up-to-date, sensitive, and equitable care and support to trans survivors across Ontario. The network may also inform new and enhanced partnerships leading to future research, training initiatives, programming, and policy in this area. And we really believe that these partnerships could even be scaled up and formalized at the national and international levels to better address what we believe is a really pressing public health issue. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I look forward to questions if there are any. But other than that, thank you so much again. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for presenting that. I really appreciate that you took the time to be here.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And there were a couple questions which your colleague Janice is replying to, typing in the chat box. So folks can just keep their eyes tuned on the Q&A box, and we'll do typing answers to those questions just so that we can keep moving along to the next presentations. But that was amazing. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so we're going to move along now to sharing the launch of new resources that we have developed as a part of the TransFormed project. And Maisha is going to bring up sharing the screen to show everyone where you can access these new health promotion tools and resources that the TransFormed project has created. So if you just go to metrac.org, across the top, you'll see a banner that says what we do. And if you click on that, you'll see the TransFormed project. And if you click on the TransFormed project, it will take you to the TransFormed webpage. And on that page, if you scroll down, you're going to see the series of resources that the project has created that are now live on the website and available for download. So if you just refresh your browser, Maisha,
Yes.
it will show, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so you can see that there's the buttons to click to download the resources. I'm just very, very quickly going to share with you the resources. So we have a glossary of terms, which it's a pretty comprehensive glossary to support individuals and service provider with knowledge and context of terminology used in Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. It also has a really beautiful pride flag index at the back. We have preventing intimate partner violence in Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. This is a comprehensive health promotion tool for service providers that focuses on increasing service provider capacity to provide more inclusive and affirming supports to Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans survivors. We have healthy and unhealthy intimate relationships in Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. This tool is a resource designed specifically for community members, providing information on understanding the signs of intimate partner violence within Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities, finding support, and also exploring the signs of what a healthy relationship can look like. Finally, we have End the Silence on Intimate Partner Violence, support services for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities in the Greater Toronto Area. And this is a resource that outlines support services for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans folks. It includes legal services, 24-hour services and crisis support, shelters and housing, counseling, health, and information referrals and resources. And while we recognize that there's still many barriers that make accessing services difficult, as folks have been talking about in their presentations, these resources that we have listed were selected specifically by members of the peer leadership group and have been accessed by folks within Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. And we hope that all organizations, including the organizations who we've listed in this brochure, are going to continue the work to continue to decrease barriers and make their services more inclusive and more supportive for all Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans people. So those resources are live up on our website, and you can download them and use them for your own personal use or within your organizations. And now Maisha is just going to introduce Roxana and Felix to launch a 5th resource that's specifically a legal resource. So let me just switch my...
Thank you, Laura.
No problem. There's Felix. So as Roxana and Felix are
there we go up to the spotlight, I'm just gonna introduce Roxana and then let Roxana and Felix take it away. Roxana Parsa is the former program lawyer at MedTrac's Community Justice Program, where she worked to facilitate access to justice through the development of legal materials in areas of criminal, human rights, immigration, and family law. She previously worked as refugee and immigration lawyer in the private bar, as well as in human rights and Aboriginal litigation at the Ministry of the Attorney General. She currently works as a staff lawyer at the Rexdale Community Legal Clinic.
Okay, hi. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I'm glad I could be a part of this. So I'm here just to briefly discuss the launch of the Community Justice Program's legal resource. I'd like to share, I guess, a bit about the history of the project and our process and its development. And so As Maisha said, I was the staff lawyer at Metrac during most of this project, and I assisted in its development. The project was initiated initially in 2018 as a way to build on the collective resources between the Community Justice Program and the ongoing TransFormed project. And one of the reasons it was initiated was the general lack of legal information focused on the needs of two-spirit, non-binary, and trans folks. Some of this understanding was based on research we did when we realized there's very little information out there. For example, we looked at the HALCO Trans Legal Need Assessment, which was a report that laid out quite well the diversity of legal needs as well as major access to justice barriers for the community. And so knowing that it was quite difficult to find legal information that is both nuanced and accessible for these communities, we decided that the CJP could attempt to create some sort of resource that might be useful and beneficial to different kinds of issues that might arise. And so this resource was focused on trying to be as inclusive and responsive as possible. And part of the development of this resource was the creation of sort of working with a consultation group to really lead us through the creation of the resource. So we held, I think over a year and a half, we held about 4 meetings with a consultation group consisting of members of the TransFormed PLG. And this was to help us conceptualize how we would develop the project, as well as go through the content substantially, as well as through the actual language of the content. So the group was really there to kind of lead us in the development. And then I was there, just to do some of the research and writing, but it was really a collaborative process. This process kind of led to the development of a resource that was focused on changing names and gender markers on provincial documents. So this topic was kind of arose out of a brainstorming session where, a lot of different topics came up, but we realized that with the constraints of this project and our budgetary constraints, we could only unfortunately focus on one topic. And that was the topic that we chose because we felt that it was, I think, the most accessible to a wide variety of people. I think that does really point to the fact that there are many different issues, and this is really just the starting point of a legal resource. But this topic was developed, and we developed it into a long form written resource that is found on the Ontario Women's Justice Network website, and there is a physical pamphlet as well that has been developed. I think while this is a complete document, this is an ongoing work in the fact that this area of law is constantly changing and there are new issues that come up all the time, and so it can be updated. I'm not sure if Felix has something they want to add. No?
Hi, so with the resource, because I was on board for this, I was one of the PLG members there. Sorry, just point. Oh, okay, that's weird. Sorry, my computer glitches. Oh, the joys of Zoom. So yeah, with the legal resource, it was pretty comprehensive. And I think it will really help people be able to figure out or demystify the whole process of transitioning. I would like to highlight that as much as people can still apply to have an X marker on their birth certificate, non-binary people, and as much as people believe that non-binary people, or have been misled to believe that non-binary people can legally transition, there is still the matter of the fact that the X marker is treated as a Band-Aid that covers a binary gender that's retained on file. So currently, non-binary people cannot transition. Non-binary people cannot transition legally. And this is seen in OHIP, Service Ontario. So if you're going to apply for a driver's license or a photo ID card, a binary gender is still retained on file. And this is something that is not really acknowledged or examined, and I really think it should be. And we should be mindful of this as service providers or as people who work in community. And yeah, work to address this, because we will not have trans rights so long as non-binary people don't have rights or representation.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think that's a really good point. And I think that is something that we tried to address in the resource by, stating, for example, that no matter what is changed on the face of the documents, the original information is still held in the records. And that is a big problem. And I think really points to the fact that there are still ongoing huge barriers in the law, and that the law is so constrained in what it has at the moment. And so it's a really good area for ongoing advocacy and change. But I hope this resource is a starting point for people looking for information. And it can be found on the website, as I said earlier.
Thank you, Roxana and Felix. And yes, the site that we just showed you, I just want to really briefly pull it up. The resource is available on the same webpage with the transformed documents. So you'll see right here, making gender and name changes on identity documents, just in the same way as all of these other resources. You can click download PDF, and then that will help you have access to the file. So I just wanted to quickly note that that's where folks can find the resource. As we're waiting for the spotlight and Zoom to catch up to us, I just want to say thank you again. I agree, like Felix, I think it was really important to bring up what you did. There's still so much work left to do around that aspect of the legal portion. It's really unfortunate that we're not there yet, but I also agree that this resource is a really good starting place for folks who want that information on name and gender marker changes. Especially because I don't know of any resources like this that are available in such a concise and organized manner. So I really hope service providers who are here are able to take that and use it with their clients and patients, but also that community members feel free to look through that, and hopefully we'll find what they're looking for.
I would just like to add that the resource is just focused on Ontario. So it might be similar in other provinces, but this is solely Ontario as well as passport. So federal in the sense of passport and SIN card and Aboriginal status card. But otherwise it's all provincial.
Thank you both so much for being here to share the information on that resource and start that important conversation. I think now we're going to move into sort of wrapping up the symposium portion of the presentation today before we move into the webinar. So Maisha, can I pass it over to you to sort of do that piece?
Yeah, I'm just pulling up our slideshow again because I want to briefly be able to talk about the evaluation portion and what you can do to participate in that.
I'm going to invite Paula to start her video, who's our evaluator on the project. So Paula can speak to the evaluation, and then Maisha, we can just sort of do our wrap up after that. So just while Paula is hopefully starting up her video, we have here the evaluation for today's symposium. So there's both like a QR scan code that you can, if you have that on your phone, you can just scan what Maisha has up right now on the PowerPoint to access the evaluation, or you can click, I'm going to put the link in the chat bar so that you can just click on that link that I've just put in the chat bar there to fill in the evaluation. Is Paula here? Not yet. Okay, so the evaluation's really, your feedback is really important to us. We still have 2 more days of the symposium, so please take some time to share your feedback with us so that we can integrate any feedback as we move forward. Oh, there's Paula. So
hi, everyone.
There we go.
Yeah, sorry, my video just decided to turn right off at the exact moment that you called upon me. So my apologies. Hi, everyone. My name is Paula. I work with Metrac as an equity manager and as the evaluator for the TransFormed project. So it's been a delight to be here with you on the call, on this Zoom call this afternoon. And it's been an honor to work on the project since last year, about September. So yeah, yes, it's an honor to be here with all of you. I'm not sure if Laura, you've spoken to this at the moment, but a key component of this project is the evaluations. And so we would really love to have your feedback, because this feedback will inform future programming, future services that are offered. And as we all know, this is a very innovative and progressive project. And so we do really want to hear your voice in all of this and bring all of your suggestions and recommendations to the table so that we can better inform our programming and practice. And so that's why we're quite keen to do the evaluations, although they may seem a bit lengthy in questions. We have tried to make them as quick and simple as possible by having user-friendly tools of the barcode to access the evaluation with your phone, or the link that I think is also available and is going to be shared in the Q&A, I believe.
It's in the chat bar.
Okay, in the chat box. Okay, so that's all I have to say. And again, my many thanks for your participation this afternoon. And it's been a pleasure to hear all of you speak.
Thanks, Paula, for being here.
Not at all.
So as we wrap up today, I just want to take a minute to thank everyone again, all the guests and panelists who presented such important information today. And I want to thank our funders again, Public Health, City of Toronto, Department of Justice, and the Law Foundation of Ontario for supporting us in getting to this stage. We're going to take a short break in a little bit, and then our webinar for the day, supporting Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans community members, is going to start at 4:15 p.m. So you're able to kind of go take a little pause and then come back. I do want to let you know our registration for day 2 and 3 are still open, so you're still able to access that through the link that you see in front of you, or through the links that you saw through the outreach materials. So we really hope you'll be able to join us on day 2 and 3. Day 2 is doing a focus on Two-Spirit communities and a disability awareness conversation, while day 3 is really getting into the details of trans and non-binary intersections and taking a closer look at some of our focus groups and individual interviews.
Excellent. So just again, the team at METRAC and everyone who's involved in the TransFormed project, our peer leadership group advisory committee, we thank everyone for their participation today in making this first day, just day 1 of our 3-day symposium possible. Thank you to everyone who came in and participated. We have a moment if people have any questions that they want to put in the Q&A box. Aisha and I will be happy, and any of the panelists who are still here, to answer, and then we will formally start our webinar presentation at 4:15. But if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A right now so we can get to them before the webinar.
And I'll just add on, if you don't have questions right now, but they come up later, please don't hesitate to email me at transformedcoordinator2@metrac.org. I believe we can put it in the chat as well, but yeah, don't hesitate for any questions, concerns. If you need like a review of where the materials can be found and the webpage link, all of that, I'm more than happy to get back to you about that.
And also just a reminder that the whole symposium presentations and also the webinars are being recorded and will be available for folks, along with the notes from the note takers. So again, Maisha's email address is in the chat, and you can connect if you have further questions about any of those things. I just see some thank yous coming in through the chats. Thank you everyone for your participation. And feel free to take a break and then join us back at 4:15 as we'll be starting the launch of our webinar.